Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Will Moss. I am the CEO and co-founder of HBCUconnect.com. Wanted to welcome you guys to this evening's event for those of you that are on the East Coast, and this afternoon's event for those of you that are on the West Coast. First of all, thank you for taking the time out to join us to learn a little bit more about Microsoft's Azure Dedicated team. I, just like a lot of you, am very excited to learn more and to meet some of the folks that are on the team that have actually taken their time out of their schedule to share with you sort of a day in the life, to give you some background information about what Azure Dedicated does and the opportunities that they have available. So in case you guys don't know, we typically, just to give you an idea, we typically do these types of events in person in different cities all over the country, where we're bringing opportunities to work for Microsoft to people in different local markets to consider. But because of the current, COVID-19 crisis, instead of canceling this event, Microsoft decided to keep the event intact and to go online and go virtual with the event. So kudos to Microsoft for your continued efforts to connect with diverse candidates and your efforts and time today to present to our candidates. So thank you for that. Now, just to kind of do some housekeeping or house cleaning, or however you want to call it, let me go over the agenda very quickly, and then we'll just jump right into it. So first thing we'll do is I'll give you guys a little bit of a background on our relationship with Microsoft, relationship between HBCU Connect and Microsoft, what we typically do together, and what the opportunity is for you. Then I will pass it over to Bert Molinari, who will present and keynote for us and give you some insight into Microsoft and Azure Dedicated. Once Bert finishes up, then I will introduce the Azure Dedicated team members that have taken their time out to basically give you guys a glimpse into a day in the life or life at Microsoft, especially in the Azure Dedicated team. So once we do team introductions, each team member will introduce themselves, what they do with everybody on the call. And then we'll do sort of a panel discussion where I have some pre-selected questions that I like to ask the different team members so that you guys can get a better idea, not only about Microsoft's Azure Dedicated, but also Microsoft's culture and some really, kind of up-to-date topics that you guys might be interested in. So we'll do the panel discussion, then we'll do a live question and answer, which will be the interactive portion of the event. So you guys will have the opportunity to ask questions in the chat window. So if you're on Microsoft Teams, there's a chat functionality. So you can type your questions into the chat, and then I will read off your questions to the team members, and hopefully we can answer all of your questions before we're out of time. So we'll be on for about roughly an hour and a half. So buckle up. Then we'll end the event and talk about next steps and the recruitment process. Okay, so jumping right into it. Like I said, my name is Will Moss, CEO of HBCU Connect. We forged a partnership with Microsoft roughly 9 or 10 years ago, where initially we were doing a lot of online outreach to African-American professionals and helping them align with jobs within Microsoft. But everything was online. But the challenge was, Microsoft gets hundreds of thousands, if not more, applications for employment from people all over the world. And Microsoft wanted to do a special effort to make sure that the candidates that we were bringing to the table got a good look by Microsoft. So we proposed the idea of doing actual events where Microsoft could invite their hiring managers, their recruitment team, some representatives from folks that are actually on the team doing the jobs. And then what we would do is invite people to attend to learn more about Microsoft and to present themselves and their skills and their experiences to Microsoft in an event format. So we started doing events probably 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, and we've been doing events with Microsoft ever since, which should demonstrate to you guys their commitment to diversity. So that's sort of the history of our relationship. Now, given the current environment, like I said, we are doing these events virtually. So they are still committed and dedicated to offering opportunities to diverse communities. And the opportunity is here for the taking. So most of you guys, if not all of you guys, have a background in software engineering and software development. And Microsoft is using this opportunity not only for you to get more familiar, but to set up some interviews with you guys. So I should have all of your resumes. I've presented those to the teams and the recruiters at Microsoft. There was also an interview interest form, but we'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation. But you'll have the opportunity to present your resume to Microsoft and potentially interview. And Microsoft does make hires from these events. So this is not just us sitting here talking and then nothing happens. They actually are going through resumes, trying to set up interviews and trying to make hires. So this is a real event. That's the opportunity for you guys. So welcome and thank you for joining us. So without further ado, Bert, if you are ready, you can actually take over the presentation and I'll hand it over to you.
All right, let's try this out. Thank you, Will.
No problem.
Right screen here. Does that work?
That works. We can see it.
Cool. First up, thanks for the intro. And thank you to everybody who's joined us today. I hope everybody is healthy, both physically and mentally during these tough times, and appreciate everybody taking an hour and a half out of their day to come and listen and hear what Microsoft has to say. And we're looking forward to a great session today with lots of good questions. So I'm going to talk for, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes or so to tell a little bit about Azure Dedicated, what we do, what the business is, and get things kind of started and hopefully seed some questions for later on. Here's the agenda. I should have added a bullet just a little bit about me. So I'm an engineering manager in Azure, more specifically in this group called Azure Dedicated. I've been at Microsoft for 14 years or 15 years now, more specifically in Azure for the last 4 or 5 years, and working in Azure Dedicated for about 1.5 years or 2 years. Before I worked at Microsoft, I worked at a bunch of smaller companies. Story I like to tell people is at Microsoft, you go through this thing, employee orientation, and it's everybody who's starting at Microsoft that week. When I did it 14 years ago, I think there were about 150 people in my new employee orientation, which was bigger than any company I ever worked at before. So I've seen kind of both ends of the spectrum in terms of small companies and big companies. So agenda-wise, I want to talk a little bit about what we do, and I'll paint a kind of broad strokes picture about Azure on the business side and get into the Azure Dedicated business a little bit so people understand who some of the customers are, what are the scenarios, what are the opportunities that we have from a business. And then I have some slides that talk a little bit about technology, since we're engineers and we like to talk about that kind of stuff. It's the first time I these slides, so hopefully the story goes well. If people have feedback either before or during or after, I'm always glad to hear it and see how we can do. So first on the business. I did not make this slide. I copied it from someone else, hence the cool animation. So Microsoft Azure is Azure's public cloud platform. And it's been around for many years before I started working on it. People probably hopefully familiar with what clouds are and the different offerings that are provided by companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft. Essentially what we're providing is platforms, infrastructure, and services so that customers can run applications, services, and workloads to run on somebody else's hardware. So Azure's business is about, we absolutely target a lot of large enterprise customers. We'll talk a little bit about that probably later. Maybe I'll probably touch on it a little bit verbally in some of the slides while I'm talking. But what we see is customers have a lot of IT spend, and they spend money to run applications within their own data centers, and they want to get out of running. They did only the applications, but they don't want to deal with the infrastructure costs. They don't want to deal with buying servers and storage stuff and networking gear and operating it. They want to let somebody else do it. In addition to that, public clouds offer them a lot of elasticity. So you get dynamic scale. You can just go to a UI or a web UI and say, hey, I want a bunch more machines, and you can get those provisioned. You can modernize. So we provide services around things like containers and Kubernetes, leading edge services like machine learning and AI on top of that, so that, again, if a company wants to try something like some data science or data analytics, they don't necessarily have to build a bunch of stuff to get there. They can just start consuming some Azure services that do that. And we see a lot of growth, and every provider that's in this space sees a lot of business. So there's a big pie, and we'll talk a little bit about the pie later. One of the things that we see, though, is that not every application can kind of just natively run in the cloud. So back, if you start, whenever cloud started 10 years or so ago, the vision was that we build these commodity set of servers and platforms and virtualize them in such a way that customers would just build their applications on top of that infrastructure. And that's been going great, but not everything can just run on a x86 VM. Many are tied to particular types of platforms. And if you're going to rewrite your application, there's a cost to rewriting it. Then a lot of businesses don't want to deal with that cost. They want to keep the application running, but they don't want to deal with porting it into a cloud. They want to be able to run the same hardware that's underneath it, that's specialized in some cases, and let that run in the cloud. So they get the benefits of the cloud, things like programmability, lower cost on operations and infrastructure, and even some additional pluses on things like security and scale by putting it in the cloud. And everybody's going at their own pace. The story I kind of like to tell around this, it's a somewhat fictional one. I do a lot of recruiting, so I tell a lot of candidates this story. You can imagine a company like Shell Oil, which has a bunch of servers and infrastructure and data centers that they own and they run. And if you go back, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe Shell Oil had some application to let employees record when they were going to take vacations. And the application was a web interface, maybe a little business logic, and then some SQL database. So 5 or 6 years ago, they said, hey, this cloud thing looks pretty cool. Let's figure if we can put this, this employee vacation tool into cloud. And they do that because it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of rewriting there that has to happen. Those applications don't have any specialized requirements on hardware or anything like that. So they do that. And as they move forward, they put more and more stuff in the cloud, and they're spending less money for their on-prem hardware. And that's awesome. But then they get to a certain point where there's some stuff they just really can't move. And that requires very specialized hardware and almost purpose-built deployments. And this is against the grain of what we do in clouds, where everything's kind of like built to scale and commodity. So Azure All Up, Microsoft's cloud product, built around, primarily around getting that large chunk of customers that can virtualize their applications. So Azure Dedicated is an organization that is an organization inside of Azure, and we are expanding Azure to support additional platforms. So here, what I've tried to capture is on the left side where it says Azure Compute. This is stuff that is the bread and butter, common stuff that you find in every cloud platform. And this stuff is super popular, super successful, and companies run a lot of IT on top of this. So, it goes anywhere from entry level, you can do storage optimized, we have GPUs. So we're expanding that fleet, but it still can't capture everything. And so what we found, and we've, as a business, and Amazon and Google see the same thing, is that you can get a good chunk of the customer base with this real commodity, highly reliable, highly performant, cost-effective compute stuff that we have on the left. But there's an opportunity to get more customers and satisfy more demand if you can build a little bit more purpose-built stuff. And that's where Azure Dedicated is, over on the stuff on the right. So a few of the workloads that we support, VMware. So VMware is one thing that's common across these things is that either the company or the technology that the company provides in this list to the right has been around for a long time, and they have a long line of existing enterprise customers that are running this stuff on-prem. So VMware is a super popular private cloud offering that has massive penetration in the enterprise space, and companies range from all different sizes that run this stuff in their own data centers. SAP is a very high-end in-memory database that a lot of companies like Coca-Cola basically run their business on. So they need this stuff for stuff like analytics and payroll, and it's really mission critical for them. Cray, supercomputer manufacturer, there's companies like UK Met, basically weather company in the UK that does a lot of weather forecasting. They require Cray supercomputers. They need this stuff to run high-end analytics and modeling. The little N thing, which didn't translate well when I copied it to black, is for NetApp. NetApp is an appliance maker for high-performance file storage. SkyTap is a relatively new thing that we've onboarded. Their product is about providing infrastructure as a service for IBM Power machines. So IBM Power machines are just a different CPU type that, again, many large enterprises have dependencies on, but that doesn't run natively in the cloud. So that's kind of the common theme in all the stuff on the right, is that there's large customers, they're heavily invested, they've been running this stuff for a long period of time, and it doesn't just work on Azure Compute Fleet, which is the stuff on the left. Hence the need to kind of be able to support additional capabilities in the cloud, and that's why we use the term expanding Azure to support additional platforms. All right, my next slide. So market opportunity. So this is one I got from somebody in our biz dev department. So basically the point I want to land here is that the pie chart you see in the middle kind of is meant to capture all IT spend. And the two slices that are in black and blue are either IT spend already going to a public cloud, or IT spend that will go to a public cloud in some period of time, as public clouds are built today, with the stuff that was on the left in the last picture, so commodity. The white part of the pie here is money still being spent on-prem that's kind of a bit of an untapped market. Now, again, Amazon, Google, and us, we're all tapping into that market, but it's this huge landscape of stuff. Either will somehow get rewritten to work in the cloud, or it just needs to get natively moved, or it will just stay where it is. So from a business perspective, there's a lot of potential here to get into some new markets and enable new customers to reduce their costs and really focus on what they're really good at. So if I go back to my Shell Oil example for a second, they've moved their employee vacation reporting tool to the cloud, but they may still be spending money on an SAP database, a Cray supercomputer, some NetApp stuff, and that's costing them money that isn't really in their core competency. Their real core competency is about drilling for oil, refining oil, processing it, marketing, and selling it. So they'd like to be able to reduce the cost, but they still need those things. The Cray supercomputer story that I completely make up is you can imagine that they need a Cray supercomputer because they're going to go drill an oil rig somewhere in the ocean, and they need to do a bunch of analysis to make sure that they get that thing in the right place. And that requires a lot of horsepower on the computing side. So they can't just get rid of that thing, but at the same time, their data centers are getting vacated because more and more stuff is going to the cloud. But they have this purpose-built thing that they still want to be able to run, so they go to cloud providers like Microsoft and they say, hey, can you take this off of our hands? And we say, sure, but there's a bunch of technical challenges. So hopefully I painted a picture a little bit here on what the business is, what some of the customers are like, what some of the opportunities are in very broad strokes. And in the next set of slides, I'm going to get a little bit into the technology stuff. I guess I want to pause here and see if there's any sort of questions right now before I jump in. Otherwise, we will have time later too. I can't see the chat, so maybe Will, you can tell me if there's any questions that I should jump on now.
Not yet. I don't see questions yet, so I think we're good.
Okay, cool, great, thanks. So technology. So first, I want to talk a little bit about what basic cloud architecture looks like, and then we'll talk about how Azure Dedicated is helping to expand that to support some of this new stuff. So everything starts with the customer. So here I've got two customers, customer one and customer two. I want to paint a picture about stuff that the customer sees. So if anybody here on the call goes to the Azure portal today, this will kind of be hopefully capture at very high level what your experience is like, and also give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtains of what it looks like for us as Microsoft employees to provide that product to you. And then we'll see how that stuff has to evolve to support these new emerging types of workloads that customers are used to running on-prem, but that we want to run in the cloud. So that's what I'm going to try and get to in the next couple of slides. So we start with a couple of customers, customer one and customer two. Their interaction point is with the Azure portal and APIs. So you just go to azure.com and you can get to the Azure portal, and you can start doing things like spinning up virtual machines. So customer one goes in and she creates a couple of virtual machines. Customer two goes in and does the same thing. So this is all stuff that the customer is seeing. So this is all in the customer space. Behind the scenes, this is all getting, these VMs are being deployed on top of Azure hosts. These are physical machines that Azure owns and operates that we put software on. So the little triangles are my attempt to capture software components or that are running on top of those machines. So the main thing to kind of get in this picture is that anything that's blue is owned and operated by Microsoft, and really our engineers are in there. If it's in the top space, the customer can see it a little bit. If it's not in the top space, the customer doesn't really see it. So these hosts are physical machines. We can put whatever operating system we want on there. We can put whatever software we want on there because the customer never gets on them. The customer is always in this virtual space that's in that top layer. So the customer can go do whatever they want within their virtual machines, but they never see what's going on under the host. And this creates this really awesome level of abstraction in that we as cloud providers can do whatever we want as long down in this bracket down here, as long as it doesn't break anything up here. So we can innovate, we can play around however we want, we can add new capabilities, we can deploy new code. And as long as we keep these things running, customers fine. Below the Azure host, there's a physical, which has a gear in it, routers, switches. There's other software that as well. This stuff that we as cloud operators are really in the weeds on. The customer doesn't know it exists because they don't interact with it, but they absolutely rely on this stuff working, because if this host were to die, these VMs need to go somewhere else. If this network dies, then these two hosts can't talk to each other. And if these two hosts can't talk to each other, then customer one's VM on over here can't talk to customer one's VM over here. So there's these dependencies that are there under the hood, and that's where I'm kind of opening up a little bit to show what goes on underneath the stack from what the customer sees. And what glues all of this together is the Azure control plane. This is a huge set of software services that run in our data centers to help orchestrate and coordinate everything. So the customer goes in and they say, hey, customer one goes in and they say, I want to restart this VM over on the right. They take some action on the portal that goes through the control plane. Packets get sent over to the host through the physical network. The host then initiates some action to restart the VM on the customer's behalf, so if they're executing these things through a portal or an API. And again, this is a huge, these boxes aren't at all drawn to scale. They're just sort of representing some of the different very high level pieces that exist underneath the hood from what the customer sees. And so again, the main point I want to get here is that there is this line of abstraction right here between the green and orange boxes and all the blue stuff. So again, Azure control plane, customers don't interact with it directly, but it's essential to that thing working. And imagine this whole thing stamped out, I don't know, 50 times, because we've got like 50 different regions around the world. So there's not just one instance of this. So that's a very high level cloud before Azure Dedicated starts coming along and saying, hey, how do we expand this thing so that we can take some of these new types of workloads? Let me go to my next slide. So now this is the emerging cloud architecture. So again, it all starts with the customer. We've got customer one and two. They're interacting with the Azure portal. Customer one, like before, says, hey, I want a virtual machine for something. Customer two says they want a virtual machine for something too. This stuff goes on to a host, just like we talked about before, through a physical network, control planes involved. But now customer one decides they want something that requires a bare metal machine. By bare metal machine, I mean the customer can actually get on the machine. So an example here is SAP, one of the products that I mentioned in an earlier slide. So if a very large enterprise customer comes and they say they need a database that has, say, 20 terabytes of RAM, or requires 20 terabytes of RAM to run, we actually give them a physical machine, and they get on the physical machine. So that's cool for them because now they can run their application on that physical machine. It's hard for us because now all of a sudden that abstraction that we had before is gone. So before we had that abstraction where there was this nice layer because we could always play around on the host and manipulate the host to support the VMs, but now they're on the machine. And we got to be able to plug the machine into all the different stuff that's in Azure so that this VM can talk to their bare metal machine, because they don't want just a bare metal machine. They want a bare metal machine that can connect to the rest of Azure. So this is where Azure Dedicated comes along, and we are building tech that's in this little sideways L thing that helps glue it all together, both at a networking layer, control plane level, storage systems. I haven't even drawn storage in these pictures to kind of try and keep it simple. But the basic idea is we're shimming in services and tech, and in some ways expanding some of these other boxes so that they can take on these new capabilities, so that a customer can be on a machine, can still connect to their other machines that are on Azure hosts, but that line of abstraction all of a sudden got really blurry. And it's a hard problem because we have to go in and operate across a bunch of different technology stacks, because Azure is a huge system as is, and customers expect this machine to operate kind of like this machine over here, even though this one's a VM and this one's a bare metal machine, and this one's a VM that has all these services under it to support it. They still want the same kind of operations and the same kind of connectivity and the same sort of functionality that they can get from a VM. So that's really the essence of what Azure Dedicated is doing. We're building this tech, but we're also making modifications in the control plane. We're making modifications in the physical network, in some cases on hosts as well, to make this green box work and work seamlessly to the customer, so it looks just like a virtual resource, even though it's a physical resource. So that's kind of at a very high level what the tech problem is that we're trying to solve. We'll go on to my next slide. So this is going to be quick, just to tell you a little bit about the Azure Dedicated team. We are about 175 employees. About 145 of us are engineers, either software, networking, or SREs, site reliability engineers. We have about 25 program managers and about 5 people of administrative staff. Really short history. We've only been an organization formally for about 1.5 years or 2 years, because this is an emerging thing for Azure and the industry in general. Sorry for my dog barking. So I think we started probably around, I don't know, 70, somewhere 60, 70 people about 1 year ago, to 175 already, and we continue to grow because it's an area of big demand. And see from the last picture, there's a ton of collaboration we have to do, as well as building new technology at the same time. And we've got a bunch of products we support. And the other thing that's both really cool and really demanding about the job is our customers are really demanding. So you can imagine when you're talking about companies like Chevron or Coca-Cola, these are multi-billion-dollar companies, and they expect world-class service, and we expect to give them world-class service, which means there's a lot of work that has to happen across the board to have quality services and quality offerings. So that's a little bit about the people that we have on the team. Locations, we're in Redmond, Washington, Hyderabad, India, and we have a team in Sunnyvale, California. There's a ... there because there's some more, but I can't really talk about that in depth right now, but we'll probably be expanding to another location soon. Last point, we are a diverse and inclusive team. So we have people from a whole bunch of different backgrounds, men, women, you name it, we've got it. We really believe in having diverse perspectives. We spend a lot of time on culture. It's really important that we have an environment where everybody feels like they can contribute and be heard, both good and bad. You know, it's good to give positive feedback and critical feedback of each other, because we're all about learning and how do we do better. We're really big on being inclusive. We welcome every voice that we can to be involved in conversations and have a say in what we do. The team is really, really important, and team culture is really, really important to us. We definitely do better when we're a team. It's true in just many walks of life, and it's really important to our products and ultimately our customers. And we'll build better products for our customers if we take different perspectives and opinions and can work together as a team. That's the whirlwind tour of my slides. That's all I got.
Hey, quick question first.
Yeah.
So how do you see Azure Dedicated growing from the need for engineers and the types of engineers that you guys need right now?
Yeah, I'll tell you my personal hiring philosophy is from just like the types of engineers. I love it when people are smart and passionate. And by passionate, I mean passionate about the problems that we are trying to solve. So being an engineer, you're kind of always learning, and the hallmark of a good engineer is that they like to learn. So it matters. It's awesome if people have specific experience in any of the stuff that I just talked about. But if you don't, but you're really smart and you're really passionate about learning that stuff, you'll do well. So that's a little bit on, the kinds of people that we look for. It's really smart and passionate is what I look for. And then in terms of growth, we continue to grow, so I probably shouldn't get into specifics, but we will be more than 175 people in a year for sure.
Hey, I had a question. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Hello?
Yeah.
You hear me? Okay, let me ask, because I don't see any text thing that I can type in. So my question is, so you showed that layer above, like you gave an example of a bare bones machine, basically. So that layer above it, what language is it primarily written in? And then my second question is, how much less efficient is it running on top of your layer versus running directly, on a bare bones machine? Is it a significant drop off in efficiency? That's all.
Got it. Yeah. So first question was about languages. Really, there's a whole bunch. We use whatever is the right tool for the job. And because we are working across these disparate workloads and products, we'll pretty much use whatever the right tool is for the job. That being said, probably the predominant language for us is C#. We absolutely have people that write code in Go. We have people that write code in Python. We have people that are writing code in either C or C++. I forget which one, maybe both. And it really just depends on the project, because one of the things that we do as a team is we cover a whole wide landscape of technologies to make them work with these scenarios. So, I was trying to, like earlier, I had that big box about the control plane. There's a whole bunch of stuff there that already exists because Azure's invested in control plane technology for years. And different teams may have used different languages. So we go in and we write code in whatever language is in that service. That being said, we also have stuff that we're writing on our own, and when we use the right tool for the job. But again, really high level, I would say C#, Go, Python are probably the three biggest, and also some C and some C++. Your other question was about efficiency, and it's not always about efficiency. Sometimes it's just raw capabilities. So in the case of a Cray, a supercomputer as an example, which you could imagine that green box that I had as a bare metal machine is a whole Cray supercomputer. The magic of a Cray supercomputer is the mix of hardware, storage, networking, and the software that runs on top of all of it. So it's not even about it's not even about efficiency when you virtualize. You just can't, because the software, the whole system is built as this packaged product. You're not getting just the software off of it and then you can put it on a VM. It's the software is built into everything that runs with it. Similar with a NetApp file appliance. So NetApp will ship this box that has tons of storage. It can do super high performance file storage and deduping and encryption, but it's all built into the machine. It's not something that you can pull out and then put into a VM very easily. Does that help?
Excellent. Okay. So great insight, information, background for Azure Dedicated. That was not only, I'm sure, very helpful for candidates, but that was pretty eye-opening for me as well. So appreciate that, Bert.
My pleasure.
And if you don't have anything else, I'll go ahead and get into the team introductions. So team introductions. So we have 4 presenters that are going to talk about their experiences, what they work on, at Microsoft and Azure Dedicated, kind of how they came to work there. And so first presenter on the team is Aishu, who is a principal software engineer. So Aishu, if you're ready, I will hand the floor over to you.
Hey, hi everyone. This is Aishu. I'm the principal software engineer. I work for Bird. I'm responsible for I've been leading the Azure VMware solutions. So just like what Bird said, some of these workloads are unique in the sense that they are traditionally built in a non-cloud environment, but now they're moving to a cloud environment. So that's what brings out some of challenging functionalities that we have to build in order to support a non-cloud like workload on a cloud environment. Um, and I've been in Azure Dedicated for about 2 years, close to 2 years, not 2 years yet, but close to 2 years now. And that's about it about me.
So just, I want to give people sort of a chance to kind of get to know you and get to know the different team members, just so they have an idea of sort of the Microsoft culture and the people that work there. So how did you end up working at Microsoft?
Okay. So before working at Microsoft, I was actually working at VMware, which was great. I built the identity stack that they use in the VMware's cloud, the cloud solution, the private cloud solution. Um, the reason I gravitated towards Microsoft is that I enjoy the work-life balance at Microsoft. Like they truly value you for as a person and not just a workhorse getting work out of you. So that's one of the reason I gravitated towards Microsoft. As far as working at Microsoft, the culture, what I truly like is um, so although there's hierarchy, there's managers there's your manager's manager and so on. Overall, people are respectful. They value everyone's opinion. It doesn't matter if you're a junior engineer or a senior engineer. Everybody's opinion counts, and that helps the growth better because you're open to everyone, and then you get to think about perspective that you may have otherwise missed. So that's one of the things that I like about the Microsoft culture.
Typical day in the life for you. So I know you're a software engineer, principal software engineer, but how much of your time is actually coding versus other activities that you're responsible for?
Coding, okay. As in my role, I think coding is very little, but I mostly look at architecture, driving discussions, and ensuring alignment with like one thing that is critical in our thing is like it's very easy to fall into a pattern where you build a custom solution for every workload just because the nature of workloads are different. Like VMware is completely different from SAP, is completely different from say Cray. So it is easy to fall into a pattern where you build custom solution for each and every workload. While it may get us the benefit of time to market, we are burdening ourselves with having to support these different stacks. So one thing that is crucial in my role is to ensure alignment in the sense that something that we build for VMware can be leveraged for SAP as well as for Cray. Like we are building a platform that can, it is challenging because like I said, every workload is different. So we strive to build this platform that can be leveraged for across different workloads.
So last question for you. I know you said you're responsible you're on the VMware team. What kind of technologies and languages are team members using that work on your particular team?
It's the same as what Bert described. So we'd like to align with the tooling that the rest of Azure uses. So by that aspect, we tend to again use C# or Go or Python, and maybe even a little bit of C or C++.
Excellent. I appreciate you sharing that and your background with us. Okay, so next up we have Horace, who's also a software engineer on Azure Dedicated. So Horace, if you're ready, I'll pass the presentation over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Horace. As Will said, I'm on Azure Dedicated. I've been with Microsoft and Azure Dedicated for about 10 months now. I'm actually a recent grad from college. In terms of how I ended up working for Microsoft, yeah, it's just started 10 minutes ago. Went through the regular interview process. It actually started out when a recruiter found me on LinkedIn. So it was a pretty good process. I liked the vibe that I got when I interviewed and decided to join. In terms of what I do on a daily basis, I am also on the VMware project. And what that means for me is essentially building out different services that are required for that stack. In terms of the technology in that stack, as the previous presenter said, most of I'd say most of our stack is probably Go for my team anyhow. At least 50% Go. Then there's some C# and even some F# now actually. And of course we have different microservices and stuff that in our stack as well. So we make use of those technologies like containers and Kubernetes. Yeah. What else am I supposed to talk about?
Typical day in the life. And then I got another interesting question for you after you get into that.
All right. Typical for me. So I'm not a principal. I'm just a regular software engineer. So I think in general, I get to do a little bit more coding than the principals. I feel like the principals tend to be in a little bit more meetings. But yeah, I could on a typical day I could spend maybe half my day coding. I'd still have a few meetings, like maybe an hour or two at most. My team has daily stand-ups where we essentially check in, see the progress of where everyone's at, if there's anything blocking their progress. But even though most of the time outside that can be spent coding, I feel like as an engineer building these new solutions, a lot of my time isn't spent physically coding, it's actually spent researching solutions, because maybe coding something isn't the best solution to each problem. And then, of course, aside from that, I'm pretty involved in different, like what we call employee resource groups. So, for example, I'm in the Microsoft Soccer, the Microsoft Soccer League got canceled, but yeah, because of the COVID thing. But yeah, I partake in a lot of those resource groups, which essentially just brings people together with similar interests.
So, interesting question for you, and I know a lot of people are probably that are watching this are probably thinking, what was it like for you to onboard and come to work for Microsoft as a recent grad or a new grad?
It was pretty great. It was more than I could like expect. In terms of course, first day we have like new employee orientation, and then I greet the entire team. Essentially comes and greets me. We go get lunch, and you pretty much they let you know that you pretty much have the time to settle in and ramp up. It's not like they're trying to throw you head first into anything. For the first week or so, I'm just trying to like catch my bearings, and everyone was always checking in and ensuring that I wasn't stuck or just confused about something, and they were very helpful. So in terms of onboarding, I really like it. And it also made me feel like, okay, this is a real team that I can actually work with, and it's not just a job, but actually you can actually make friends and stuff like that. So it really made me feel more comfortable just entering the workforce.
Excellent. So I think those you answered all the questions that I had. So okay, so we'll move on to the next presenter on the team, which is Cheo, who is also a software engineer. So Cheo, if you're ready, I will pass the presentation over to you.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Cool. My name is Cheo. So I've joined Microsoft as an apprentice about 2.5 years ago. So I started in this program where I just didn't know much about engineering, and I just picked it up along the way. And then towards the end of my program, I started looking within Microsoft, and that's how I ended up in Azure Dedicated. The head of our org, it started this new org called Azure Dedicated. So that's how I sort of knew about it, like the name's really familiar. So yeah, I interview with a networking team, which at the time it seemed like it was going to be, very challenging, and I think it still is. But I create tools for networking, so I get to touch almost all workloads. Primarily, the last 6 months I was working on SAP HANA. This month I'm working on NetApp. So pretty diverse on the technologies I get to use. It's also very challenging because there's so many things to know. I don't know everything, but I definitely get to taste a little bit of every workload and see what similarities they have across them. So let's see what typical. So my day-to-day, it really changes. So it depends on what sort of commitments I have for that semester. So like last semester, I had certain commitments. I had to like deliver some things for a specific workload. This semester, it's a little more diverse. So it really depends. But like there was one semester where I needed to learn Linux, like never really, program in Linux, needed to learn Go. So I picked it up. And then this semester, I have to dive into Python. So it really depends. For me, I don't know if that's the same for everybody in our org, but at least for my small team, I get to sort of travel around every workload. Yeah, that's about it. So I really enjoy our team. Actually, when I joined, I was fortunate enough to have two teams where I could join. I got interviewed for two teams. One was Visual Studio, and the other one was networking, Azure Dedicated Networking. And I just thought that networking will be more interesting. So and I'm glad I chose networking because I get to. It's really the coolest thing for me that where I sort of I get really excited about is whenever I get to log into real hardware devices. I know it's kind of like, who cares about that? But like for me, it's really cool to like go in and poke at the real bare metal networking switches and know the topology, know how those things work. It's really cool that I can see like behind the scenes, like because before I thought everything was sort of like in the cloud, right? Like nobody really understands how that works, but now I really understand how the cloud works, and just to know that like we have all this infrastructure across the globe, and I get to talk to people who actually are working on real network devices or real bare metal devices. They actually get to restart them, that kind of stuff. It's really interesting to me. So coding, it really depends on the semester. This semester is like half. There's other semesters that's all I'm doing. I'm coding all day. So yeah.
So something that I think is really cool about Microsoft is you guys get to work from your spaceship.
Yeah.
What was your path to Microsoft? Like how did you end up working for Microsoft?
Sure. So like I said, as an apprentice, so there's this program that Microsoft started. I don't know if Microsoft started it, but like I was one of the first cohorts where they took 20 people who are already working out there, right? So I was a construction PM. My job was to help remote mines set up mining camps. So like also we had an arm where they deployed hospitals. So that's what I was doing. But at some point I was like, hey, like I really like. My introduction to tech was Excel. I was like, oh man, these Excel sheets are really complicated. Is there a way to program them? So that's how I got interested in them, interested in technology. So I found this program. I enrolled. I got trained to be a software engineer. I did it for about a year. Then I got a full-time position. So that's how I ended up at Microsoft. Microsoft started this inclusion program where people like me who don't really have a clear path. If you're a college student, there's a like pipelines. You can come in, you have internships and that sort of thing. People who have been already working, they don't really have internships, right? So we have this thing called apprenticeship model. So and I'm really glad now our org's doing something similar too, and I'm helping with that. So it checks all my boxes.
Excellent. Appreciate it. Okay, so next up, we will have Dr. Alberto, who is a principal software engineer within Microsoft Dedicated. So Alberto, if you are ready, I will pass the presentation over to you.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Teo, I really love your spaceship. I don't have one yet, but I'm working on it.
Yep.
All right. So I joined Microsoft around 2 years. I think somebody would make 2 years. I joined this team. Let me give you a bit of my background. My background is maybe slightly different from the one of people here, which is great. I think it shows what's the diversity that we have in terms of background and everything. I worked in the industry for 10 years, around 10 years now. Before that, I had a different life in research. Right. At some point, I thought, okay, I've done enough research. Let me go to industry, and I've been working in different companies. Something that so I can compare, right? Other companies in the industry with Microsoft. And something that I really like, especially about this team, is the breadth of technologies that you deal with. In Azure Dedicated, what we're offering are complete systems, right? As Bert was mentioned, I think he mentioned about supercomputing or those kind of projects where you have to work with bare metal aspects, just the devices that provide the service. But it was asking a very interesting question about compliance for financial institutions. In those cases, they need specialized hardware, some servers, if you like. Then you deal with the network devices, as Che was mentioning, right? So you also see that. You also get to see all the close architecture of the network, not only the most immediate switches that we handle, but the whole architecture, and free to explore as much as you want to fully understand the whole service. That also goes to how we monitor the services. We have a very advanced technology on how we monitor those complex services, how we track the state when something is not working properly. How do we alert our engineers? Somebody was asking interesting questions about support, right? So that support, we are proactive in support. So you can see all these technologies that you have to deal with, as I was saying, support financial institutions, people that need supercomputing, people that need high performing data stores. So that's the thing that I like the most. Something about the culture that I love, I think Tasha was talking about, is how the team works as a team. There was also an interesting question of who's the most successful person in Azure. And my answer was, well, there's no one person that can be successful, right? It requires so many people to work together. So that team spirit and how people support each other, that's something that I had not necessarily seen in other companies. Okay, I think enough of what I want to say, but if you have questions in some specific aspects, I'll be happy to answer them.
So what is a typical day in the life like for you? So how much, I mean, do you still code, or are you more in a project management or planning or strategy? What's a typical day in the life for you?
Interesting question. Difficult to say what a typical day looks like, but I'll try. Different people would spend their time differently depending on the roles. I dedicate more time to architectural aspects, right? But that allows me still to go as deep as I want, to the point that for the inventory of devices that we have, I wrote some code myself. Okay, this is how we track the devices, where they are located, how do we identify them, and so on. I get to go and help with code reviews, design reviews. Also have live site duties, so it's a bit difficult to tell, but I would say that coding for me is a bit less. The role as principal engineer, usually principal engineers tend to code less than software engineers, but hard to tell. Not sure if I am answering your question, but I've tried to give a bit more the things I do more and I do less.
Excellent. Okay, so appreciate your insight. So now that everybody knows and kind of has an idea of who is on the team represented today, I want to ask a few panel questions so we can have a quick discussion. So this will be for all of you guys to kind of participate in. And then we'll go into the question and answer, and where people can ask questions in the chat, and I'll pose some of those questions to different team members. Okay, so for the panel discussion section, I want to start off with sort of a cultural question, so that people that are considering, that may potentially interview with Microsoft, they're considering, career opportunities with Microsoft. It's a major thing. So I think people care about being a cultural fit. So if someone could speak to how easy it is, or how comfortable are you being yourself, your authentic self, within Microsoft. And that question could be for anybody who wants to volunteer to answer.
Yeah, I can jump in first. I think that is one of the things that surprised me at how open Microsoft is. It seems when I joined, I realized that it's not just platitudes. It's actually a culture. The way in which the culture is structured, that they care about your cultural differences. So at first I wondered, okay, entering a work world, a massive tech company, how can I portray myself? Do I have to change myself in a certain way to fit the mold? But I was completely wrong about that. They actually encourage these differences, and everyone I work with is genuinely interested in like knowing my cultural differences. So for example, I'm from Jamaica, so I just came to the US about 5 years ago, and everyone else on the team is just as diverse and have their unique backgrounds, and it's nice how things come together into sort of a melting pot. And then because Microsoft is this massive organization, you can utilize the employee resource groups, and so that you never feel alone. So like, okay, maybe I'm the only Jamaican on my team, but there are a ton of Jamaicans at Microsoft, and there are resource groups that for them to like come together as well. So I've always felt like I could be my authentic self.
Can you speak a little bit about, so for probably most people that have been in corporate America are familiar with resource groups. So can you speak a little bit about like BAM, for example, at Microsoft, and some of the other resource groups, and what their purpose is at Microsoft?
Okay, yeah. So there are different affinity resource groups, and like BAM, Blacks at Microsoft, and essentially what that does, that group, it brings together advocates for Black/African American culture in Microsoft, but it also does this kind of promotional phase. And it for me, different persons can utilize it in different ways depending on what they want. And so for me, I use BAM as a way to actually get mentors and learn from other people's experience. So I've had like 2 great mentors so far from my BAM experience, and also actually get the ear of leadership sometimes, because when you can feel small and alone in a large organization, in a big company, these resource groups are kind of have your back. And so, for example, when we have our meetings, big execs essentially attend, and through that I've been able to talk to like some of like the EVPs and CVPs of the company. So it's resource groups are just used, or you can use them how you want. You can use them for community, you can use them for career. It's up to you.
Excellent. Okay, so another question for the group, and if nobody volunteers, I'm gonna ask Bert to jump in on this. But this is a fun question for me, because we've recently done, this is our 3rd virtual event that we've done with Microsoft. And the first event that we did was our first time using Microsoft Teams to do a virtual event. And as the reason why we're doing virtual events is because COVID-19 and people social distancing and people wanting to work from home. So we decided to go virtual, and Microsoft Teams was actually one of the recruiting teams on the call or at the event recruiting talent. So one of my questions that I like to pose, because I was so impressed, with Microsoft as a whole, is, are there any products and services that you guys are working on that you've had to focus on to meet needs that have arisen because of the crisis or the pandemic? So for example, more people are doing things virtually. So have you guys seen an increase in certain areas that you've had to address as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah, I can speak to that for a second. I'm Chris Williams, a software engineer in Azure Dedicated. And one thing that comes to mind for me is with all this COVID-19, we've had a huge uptick in, educational institutions all going virtual. And as a result of that, those institutions are using bare metal workloads behind the scenes to make those things possible. But with the huge uptick in the number of users they want to support, we've had to really buckle down and enable those and make changes to support additional capacity. And so we're constantly kind of seeing that. And that's been one aspect where we've really kind of ramped up.
So just out of curiosity, because I love it that you jumped in to kind of give an example. What is your role on the team? Like, what do you work on a day-to-day?
Day-to-day, actually, I've been with Microsoft about just shy of a year. And since I've been here, I've been doing a lot of interacting with some of our other teams within Azure, basically making code changes in other teams' code bases that further our workloads. So not things that are specific to any one service per se, but more laying some of the groundwork that allows our team to go further. Like this, increasing the ability to have more VMs supported, to say in a particular client's environment was one API that I was working on adding, or things like that.
Excellent. Okay, so next question I have from a panel discussion perspective is related to, so we have candidates that are on the call from all over the United States. We have some on the West Coast, some on the East Coast, some in the middle. And so people, so it's, of course, it's a serious decision, especially for people that have more experience, that are more embedded in their communities, to relocate to the West Coast, for example, in California, or to relocate to headquarters in Seattle or Redmond. So for those of you that are not from like the Pacific Northwest and you had to relocate to work for Microsoft, can you speak to what it was like to relocate and then get situated in the Pacific Northwest?
So I'm here on the beach, so it's all good here, but I actually moved here from the Northeast 14 years ago. So I'm originally from Massachusetts. And it depends, it all depends on where you're coming from, as what your change is like. I could say up here in Redmond, it's a great place to live. Really a lot of stuff to do, a lot of green if you're into going outside, a lot of cultural stuff. Seattle's right across the lake. It's like a 10-minute drive. There's a lot going on here. At the same time, if you want to get away, if you're the kind of person who likes to get away, you can easily do that as well. I will caveat, if you're coming from the Northeast, the pizza's not so good here. But other than that, it's all right.
So this is something that some of you guys have already touched on, but I'll direct this one to Alberto. So Alberto, what is it that you like most about working for Microsoft?
I was mentioning before the breadth of technologies that I can work with. I think that's what I like the most. In the past, in research, let alone, right? I will focus on something extremely narrow, and then go very, very, very deep, which is interesting. Here, what's special about Microsoft is the breadth that you can touch, right? And then, of course, you can go deep in the areas that you like the most. And I think Microsoft is one of the few companies where you can do that, right? Where you can essentially learn about almost any technology that you're interested in.
Excellent. So one thing I want to make sure to do is leave time for questions. So for those of you that have been watching and listening in to the presentation so far, getting to know Microsoft Azure Dedicated, if you have questions, please feel free to write your questions in the chat, and then I'll read off the questions to the team to answer. So we'll go ahead and get into the Q&A section of our presentation tonight. So first question that I see that's queued up from Manuel says, does your team have opportunities for developers who are interested in more front-end oriented roles? So are there any front-end oriented roles within Azure Dedicated?
It's funny you say that, because I think it was just yesterday there was a conversation about how we needed some UI developers. So yes.
So there it is, short and sweet. There are definitely opportunities for front-end developers. So I know I got a quick question. I know we're on the call with mostly software engineers, and this is a software engineer hiring effort, but are there any other types of PMs or engineers that you guys look for periodically?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have PM roles as well. I'm an engineering manager, so I want more engineers and less PMs. So, but at the same time, we probably have some opportunities. I can't speak to those here, though. I'm less well versed in that.
Got it. All right. So another question. So there's a few questions coming in related to the process, but I'll save those towards the end and for follow-up as far as the recruitment process. But I saw a question here I like. So related to programming languages. So I've heard a few different programming languages mentioned that you guys use, like Go, Python, C#, C++. But are there any prerequisites around languages that you want candidates to know when they come in to interview?
I'll say no.
Yeah, generally no. Usually in the interviews, what we're looking at is the candidate's critical thinking, how nicely they, how easy is it to work with the candidate, bounce ideas off of each other and so on. So yeah, generally no.
And I can add that when I interviewed, it was in Java, and as long as you're able to explain what your, how your code works and you understand the language you're coding in, I wouldn't get so worried about which language you choose to use.
Yeah. Yeah.
So know at least one.
Right. So know at least one language. So follow-up question.
Just to add, just real quick on that, the interview process, we want to see, Aisha really nailed it with critical thinking and being able to just write code in whatever you're comfortable with. And we always tell candidates, write whatever you're comfortable with. We want you to do the best you can do, and we want you to be comfortable, use the language you're comfortable with, use, if you're a quiet person, be quiet. We won't interrupt you. If you like to talk things through with us. We want it to be the best experience for you and set you up for success, even in the interview process.
So related to Sunnyvale and then Redmond locations, what are the two different teams work on? Are there two different teams, or are the locations just strategic? And then how do those teams in the different locations work together?
Yeah, so just in general, our center of gravity is in Seattle. We've got, I don't know what the numbers are, but I got to think it's 120 or something of the 175 engineers are in Seattle, something like that. And in Sunnyvale, then that's us. That's where Microsoft headquarters are too, just for people who aren't aware. So, majority of Microsoft employees are in Seattle. The majority of Azure employees are in Seattle. And by the way, when I say Seattle, I really mean Redmond, but just we'll keep it simple. So in Sunnyvale, our team down there, I think we're about 10, Alberto. Alberto's actually down in Sunnyvale. We're about 10-ish now?
I think we're 10 or 11, yes.
Yeah. The team down there is primarily focused on a particular piece of the networking aspects that we have to do. primarily around the data plane. So the critical pieces about how do you get packets from one of those green boxes that's a bare metal machine to anywhere else in the Azure fabric.
So I like this.
Microsoft has a presence down there as well, and Azure has a presence down there as well. So they're actually building a new campus down there too.
Excellent. So I like this question related to the feature engineering and product design process. So what drives the feature and product design process? Is it customer driven first, or is it strategic initiatives, or is it developer up, or what drives the design process, product development process?
Customers.
Customer driven.
Yep.
I like that. Straight to the point. So you guys got so all right. So I'm going through. Let me look for.
I mean, that being said, we do. There are times where we invest in things that a customer is not necessarily asking for, but we need to do it for the business. So there's some stuff that we're doing in our team around in a few different places, some innovative stuff that won't be directly customer visible, but is needed to help really glue those two worlds together and do it in an effective, cost-efficient, effective way in the long term. So not everything we do is something that the customers directly asked for, but that's kind of where it starts for sure.
Excellent. Okay, so here's a interesting question that I know a lot of candidates will want to know the answer to this as well. So maybe we could split this up into two answers. So one would be from a software engineer perspective, and then it sounds like principal engineers have different responsibilities than a typical software engineer. So what is the interview process like for a software engineer as opposed to a senior or principal engineer? I'm sorry.
I can talk about my experience when I interview for principal. Part of it is similar to any other engineer. There were coding questions, of course. The expectations are higher, right? On somebody with more experience. I think the key difference is the design aspects, right? I think the expectations on principal engineers on design questions, if we're talking about the interview process, are higher, right? Because that's also part of the work that you're going to be doing. It's going to be more architectural, more design than hands-on coding, if you like.
And then as a follow-up question for anyone that maybe has an experience that they remember when they were interviewing, what advice would you give to candidates to prepare for their interview? And like I said, most of the candidates on the call are software engineers. So anybody that can maybe provide some insight on preparing for an interview.
Well, let me abuse the question and change it slightly, because you could try and optimize for the interview, and I think they're out there how people do things. Now, if you have a smart interviewer, what is critical is to be a strong engineer, right? And what's strong? Understanding the basics of computer engineering, of computer science. Know how to know pros and cons of designs, right? For instance, if I go to the designs, in most cases when you're doing a design, there are pros and cons of each different options, right? And you have to balance. Okay, for this particular case, what echoing what Bert was saying, what does the customer need, or how are we going to fulfill the needs of the customer? And based on that, being able to balance the different technical solutions that you can design, which is the one that's going to fit better for the customer. Other than that, I think the basics on as I was mentioning, of computer science and critical thinking. That's what a strong interviewer is going to focus on, right?
Excellent. So next question is around being able, so I'm going to kind of mix two questions together because they're similar, and that is around experienced candidates coming in to work on Azure Dedicated. What types of things do you think they can have in their background that will make them successful? And then what is what are the expectations for an experienced candidate once they come to work, and to contribute, like let's say in a 90-day period?
I think a skill that I find terribly useful in our team, this is specific to our team, is soft skills for working with other teams. We work with a large number of teams, right, beyond Bert's team, and having good soft skills for interacting with those people, with other engineers, understanding their constraints, their strengths. That's a critical skill. If I have to pick one, I think that's a very important one that's specific to our team.
Anyone else have any insight to add as far as coming in and contributing and skills necessary to be successful?
Hey, Will, let me chime in here from the recruiting standpoint. First of all, Bert, do you like the background there? That's a tribute to you, my friend.
You're the man.
I see that little Fenway Park action there.
Yeah.
So
You're my favorite recruiter, Stan.
Yeah. First of all, a little bit of history here that Azure Dedicated is my favorite team. I support, and I have supported multiple teams within Azure for the last 4 years. And one of the things I think a lot of candidates come in with is a fear and phobia because of other companies being very exclusive in their hiring practices. And so they tend to screen out. There's a box checking exercise. You tend to get a lot of people that ask randomized questions that isn't relevant to the job. Whereas we're highly inclusive here. We want to know what you can do and what we can teach you in the process of learning versus, you don't have it. Sorry, we wasted your time. When you think about the culture here, and we're in the news for all the right reasons. And I joined Azure Dedicated specifically because I worked with compute, I worked with IoT, I worked with storage, some of the big name groups within Azure. The way that this team is so nimble and agile, that's one of the things that you'll have to have coming in is you have to have that flexibility. There's a lot of ambiguity that goes on in the groups. And so you have to be flexible when it's called for, and the nature of the business changes and you can't be so rigid in your thinking. So we send it to test that. But for those of you who are making the loop interviews and you go through that process, I will spend time with you to really stretch out that muscle to make sure that you have a successful interview, and I promise you that.
Can you give folks a little bit of your background, Stanley, and kind of your role, and because some candidates may actually come into contact with you, can you just give them a little bit of your background and the role you'll play in maybe the recruitment process?
Yeah. So as you apply and you research Azure, and this is going to be a landing spot for you and for you to build your career. What I do is I help set up the interview process. I get the scheduling team to come in and help you out with figuring out what's the best time for you to loop through. Before your interview, I make sure that we connect and that you have the best experience possible. Do you have all the information that you need? Do I need to work the jitters out, give you the pep talk? And then you're going to go in and do your very best work. And we're expecting that you're going to get the job. And you're going to show your very best. There's the skill set of being an engineer, but there's also the competency piece. And do you fit the culture of what they built? This is you think about the way that you get promoted and get rewarded is impact. And because the team is so small, your footprint will be seen. So this is one of the most coveted teams to join within all of Azure. So we know that if you're going to join, you get along well, you play nice in the sandbox, you're very innovative, you learn things on the fly, growth mindset. But afterwards, I'll also be working with you if you get a hire from the team. I'll be working with you on your offer and all the details that go along with that.
So can you speak to a little bit to the process, the actual interview process? Like how many do folks have to have several interviews, or is it one interview with several people? Can you speak to a little bit of the typical interview process there?
So Microsoft Loops, we have 3 interviewers that go in, and then if we have a senior leader that's present, then we have that person jump in to really talk about the career pathing. This is a person that typically has a lot of experience, like Bert, who started at a certain level, then just migrated himself through the levels in Microsoft by making impact. So you'll be meeting with a handful of people, and each person will have different questions that they'll ask, and we promise to make it exciting. And when you walk away from the experience, hopefully you'll take something away that if you get the job, great, you'll come in and you'll crush it on day one. If you don't get the job, you're still going to grow and you're still going to learn something to help you with your journey. But most cases, Bert, do you think that what's the ramp time typically for engineers that come into Azure? Because I've heard the statement that says for every 1 year in Azure, it's like 3 years in the outside world because of how innovative we are in cloud.
Yeah, I think the ramp up, it takes some time, and we know that. The thing is, so we know that it's going to take time. There's a ton of stuff to learn. There's so many acronyms, so many technologies. We're a massive organization, and then on top of that, Azure Dedicated collaborates with all these other companies outside of us. They have their own acronyms and their own technology. So there's a ton of stuff there. I did want to add a little bit on there was a question before about what makes you successful, and I was sort of thinking about it while other people were talking. I think there's a few ingredients here. Good communication skills, ability, and really just eagerness to learn stuff. And Stan, you mentioned it a few times, but just that learning, just ability to learn. And really important is being able to ask questions and ask for help at the right time. I can tell you with very high confidence, the very few times that I've seen people struggle at Microsoft when they join is when they don't ask enough questions. They don't ask for enough help. And they think, I can figure it out, And no offense, but there's just a lot of stuff we have here, and it's really hard for any one person to learn it. And we're a team. We're here to help you. We want you to be successful. We want you to be happy. Let us help you, but we can only really help you if you ask the questions. So that's a really key piece that I think a lot of people struggle with, and it's a very natural thing to struggle with because you come in, you think, oh, I want to impress. I don't want to ask questions and make it look like I don't know. It's okay. It's okay. There's plenty of stuff we don't know. I can actually tell true story, my story from 2 years ago when I was working on some other project before I started working on this dedicated stuff. I was in Azure networking. My boss at the time says, hey, we need you to work on this project. At the time, the code name was Tycoon. And I said, okay, what's Tycoon? And he told me, he's like, oh, it's some new thing where it's like bringing these enterprise workloads into Azure. I was like, well, what's an enterprise workload? And he says, well, like SAP or NetApp. I said, what's SAP? What's NetApp? This is literally the conversation in 10 minutes. And he didn't really know what it was either. He's like, it's some database thing, just go figure it out. And I said, okay. And 2 years later, here we are, we've built products. Alberto has all kinds of war stories he can tell about how to build a supercomputer over the last year. We had no idea how to build one, but we figured it out. And it's about asking questions and having that eagerness to learn. That's really critical.
Yeah, actually, with that cue, I'm going to buy. I remember it was like almost 8-9 months ago. Bert is my manager. I thought, hey Alberto, there's this thing for this supercomputer. Are you interested in working on this thing? I said, okay, tell me what is it about? What kind of work is expected from me? And he gave me some more or less answer, but I was like, okay, I have no idea what I'm signing up for. Indeed, it has been tremendous project. I keep emphasizing the breadth. The breadth of the supercomputer is beyond belief. So you were saying 1 year to 3 years. Definitely in this particular project, what I've learned in 8 months is at least 3 years for sure. As Bert says, well, I'm not going to go into the details of what each of these projects includes, but it's absolutely impossible for one person to know everything. Don't even try. Even in one of the sub-projects, knowing everything, very few people can know everything. And actually, I think the best engineers are the ones who, they know what they know it very well, and they know what they do not know, and they ask the right questions. Those are the strongest engineers that I've seen, and that's, I think that's a generic statement, right? More important, probably in the type of research that we do because of the breadth, but trying to know everything is absolutely impossible. Being able, this also links with the communication that Bert was mentioning, being able to formulate your questions of what you don't know in a way that the engineers that can help you can understand, that's critical. That's very important. So that goes into those soft skills.
Not being an engineer, I think it's a little bit confusing that engineers are some of the most curious people on the planet, and then when it comes to an interview, they clam up. Why don't you want to know about what's going on by asking questions, being curious?
Yep.
So I'm going to pick one more question from the Q&A, and then we'll just close up. And then Stanley, I think I'll give you, you or Bert, the final words as far as next steps and any words of encouragement for potential interviews. But the last question I wanted to touch on was around projects. So there's a question around how many projects or products might an engineer be working on simultaneously? Do engineers typically focus on one product and one project, for that product, or are they, are some engineers required to have their hands in multiple projects or products? I figure this might be a good one for one of the engineers or software developers on the team, and maybe Aishu or Alberto.
I think I'll start, and I'm sure more people can contribute. So like I said, all of the workloads are unique, but at the same time, we want to align as much as possible, so it gives us better pace at developing and building these solutions, and also supporting these solutions when customers have issues. So with that being said, I think at any point of time, we may be focused on, say, one particular workload, say VMware or Cray, but I think the solutions that we build are then leveraged across other workloads. So that way you can transition seamlessly. Like say today you can work on VMware, tomorrow you could work on Cray. Doesn't matter, because the solutions that we build transition seamlessly across the workloads. So I can't give it's a gray area. It's not black or white. You're working on multiple products at the same time. I'm working on one at a time.
Excellent. Okay, so I want to say thank you, and I appreciate all of the engineers, software engineers, and principal engineers that have joined us and shared your experience. But before we go, I'd like to ask if Bert, if you had anything else, and then Stanley, from a recruitment process standpoint, if you had anything else.
Stan, you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So we go through and we hope that you're interested in Azure Dedicated, and we hope that you apply and go through the process of interviewing. It's one of the greatest opportunities to get in with a startup feel and within a growing and evolving market, and everything that we're contributing to Azure. You're going to have a great opportunity to put your flag in the ground and note that you started in something very, very small that went very, very large. And I promise you that once you enter the process of our interviews, the process will go quick. There are no black holes. I follow up with folks that are going through. So we hope that you spend the time getting to know us, and just want to say thanks for spending the time with us this afternoon. And thanks, Will, for putting this on too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Will. This is awesome. I super appreciate everybody taking the time, both the Microsoft side, everybody outside. I know these are tough times. Hopefully everybody learned a little something today, and we're looking forward to hearing and being able to meet a lot of you, if not all of you, and seeing what happens from here. I can't reiterate enough, that Microsoft's a really awesome place to work. One of the best things is, you got to meet a bunch of smart people today across the board. You get challenged every day, but we're all supporting each other. It's just an awesome opportunity to learn and have a really big impact on the world. So thanks, everybody, and hopefully we'll get to meet everybody. Thank you, Will.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate the opportunity to kind of present Microsoft's Azure Dedicated team. Thank you to everybody from all of the attendees and candidates. Thank you for taking the time out to consider Microsoft and Azure Dedicated. So what I will do after the call, we will share the full video. Thanks, Kirsten, for recording. So I'll share that with everyone, as well as next steps for candidates. And if you guys have any questions, you can filter them through me, and then I will work with Stanley and Jesse if I don't have the answers to those questions. But for everybody that registered for this presentation, I have your resumes, and I shared them with Microsoft already, and so Microsoft will be looking through that list and then pulling candidates in for interviews. Okay, so thanks everyone, and really appreciate your time. And with that, good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody stay healthy.
Yep. Take
Yep.
care.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye.
evening.